Welcome to week 10, where we are going to continue on with marine life. In these series of videos, we're going to talk about biological communities and ecosystems, how they relate to each other, and the different types of communities in the oceans. So in this first video, we're going to get into what a biological community is, what an ecosystem is, and some of the main types that we see in the ocean. So, community of organisms in the ocean is basically a group of interdependent organisms that exist in the same place and time. So they're not necessarily related to each other, they're just all living in the same spot all the time. Ecosystem, similar idea, it's a biological community, so these organisms that are all living in the same place and time, and then it also factors in their physical setting. So a tide pool full of organisms versus a lake full of organisms. So the physical setting is actually taken into account with ecosystems. So some of the main types of communities and ecosystems would be sandy coastlines. We went over these in a little bit more detail last week. So we've got beach grass in some places, so we've got the areas that are above sea level, and also the beach itself, and then the sandy part of the ocean just offshore. And estuaries, we visited an estuary in our field trip last field trip, but kind of halfway through the term. So estuaries are really muddy environment, fluctuating tides, fluctuating salinities, and fluctuating temperatures. So these organisms that all live here in this ecosystem all have to adapt to those pretty drastic changes, and I've got some examples here. Pickleweed, which can turn pink eventually when it gets older. Oysters, which tend to be buried in the mud a little bit more, so you don't necessarily see them all the time at the surface. And it's hard to get to because it's covered in mud. And then in more tropical areas like maybe Florida or Louisiana, we have mangroves that grow in these estuaries. And then another example is the rocky intertidal. So this is where we went on our second field trip. So we've got organisms living in tide pools and places where the tide moves up and down. So pretty dramatic changes in tides, in temperature, in oxygen levels, and salinity as well. And the last example are midocean ridges. So these are the very, very bottom of the ocean. Immense amounts of pressure because we're at the bottom of the ocean. We've got several hundred meters of ocean water above these organisms, so they have to be prepared for that. And pretty wide changes in temperature. You can have a very high variation from super hot water that's pumping out of these black smokers in comparison to the water surrounding it. It can be extreme differences in temperature. So these organisms have to also be able to withstand those changes as well. So these are communities of organisms, so all of these guys are living in the same place, same time, and then our ecosystem in this example is this mid-ocean ridge. And then if I go back to rocky intertidal, we've got sea stars, sea anemones, rockweeds, sea urchins, all living together in the same spot and time, and then our ecosystem would be the rocky intertidal. So that's the difference between a biological community, which is just the organisms themselves, versus an ecosystem, which is taking those organisms and then also factoring in what the environmental conditions are like. So we'll sign off, come back in video 2, where we're going to talk about how these organisms are actually related to one another.